Hey guys, what's up? It's Sarah from the Bigger the Better. I am 5 days postpartum, which is crazy. I cannot believe he's here. He's the cutest little bean on the planet. And one of the biggest requests I'm getting from y'all is to share my labor and delivery story. And I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to share everything. If you are not someone who likes candor and a little bit of TMI and like real talk, like I always say, I'm like a dirty mouth from the dirty South. You're not gonna like this video because I'm gonna go into all of the nitty gritty. I'm gonna spill all of the tea. So yeah, if that's what you're looking for, let's do it. So first, I feel like I need to give some context here and talk about what my birth preferences are. Now, I definitely used the term birth preferences and birth plan interchangeably, but they're different. And so I have birth preferences, things like I was using a birth center, I wanted to be drug-free, I wanted to give birth in the water, things like that. But I tried mentally to really separate that from my birth plan. And here's why. And this is important. And I actually hope that if there's only one thing you take away from this video, it is what I'm about to say. The only birth plan you need is to be safe and calm and comfortable for both you and baby, the whole safety thing. Everything else is details. And I know that I don't want to sound dismissive because people have like a lot of really strong opinions on the way they want their births to go. But at the end of the day, things change, things happen. And if there is a change to your birth preferences, that means that the outcome is safe and calm and comfortable. You should do that. So my birth preferences were, like I said, using a birth center, going drug-free, being able to labor in the water and ideally deliver in the water, delayed cord clamping, doing vitamin K drops instead of the shot, skin to skin right afterward. Those were like the high level birth preferences I had. I maybe made it to half of those, and I don't want to scare anyone because this is ultimately a positive labor story. Like, there is very little I would change about the way my labor progressed and happened if I could. And the things that I would change were things that, well, I'll get into them, but there's very little I would change. So don't be scared by the fact that like I'm about to tell you all the ways that my labor went wrong. And that's kind of what I was saying, is that there's not a wrong way to labor if you're safe, calm, and comfortable. So having said that, let's dive into the mother freaking story. So birth is gnarly, and I mean that in the most positive sense of the word. Like, it's so intense and powerful. And yes, like if you're creeped out by like fluids and blood, then it's gnarly in that way too. But it's crazy. I went into it, like I said, with my preferences, this ideal version of what it could look like, but I gave myself so much flexibility to roll with the punches, and I'm so glad I did, because basically I had gestational diabetes, and that meant that even though I was using my birth center with a midwife model of care, I had to go out to like a perinatologist specialist for high-risk pregnancies and get additional scans. So at 38 weeks, he was measuring really big, and she was like, okay, if you have not gone into spontaneous labor by like 41 weeks, I want to see you back and make sure it's all good. Well, I had noticed my belly wasn't really growing as much, and I don't know, I just had a sneaking suspicion that was confirmed when I went to my 41 week high-risk scan, which is he was not growing as much as he should have been. Like, he was perfectly healthy, but the growth he should have charted between 38 and 48 weeks was like non-existent. He was basically the same size. And my placenta was showing signs of deterioration. It was starting to calcify and basically just kind of max out. Now, some people have perfectly healthy placentas at 42 weeks, but it's very common for your placenta to start to max out when you're past your due date, and that's what was happening to me. So that, combined with the fact that he wasn't growing anymore, she called the birth center, and they kind of recommended as a team that I do an induction. And with the birth center, there were natural induction techniques we could try first. So there was something called the Castor Oil Midwife Brew Smoothie. There is something called a Foley bulb where you can like manually inflate this bulb inside that manually dilates your cervix and can kind of get things kick-started. So that was where we started, and that was on Tuesday night. So I went in and like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was only 1 centimeter dilated, which I don't know why I was frustrated by that, but I kind of was, because I've been having contractions off and on. I'd been pumping. I'd been trying to do all the induction things because my pregnancy was pretty rough. Go back and look at my other videos if you want more details on that, but I was ready to not be pregnant anymore. So we went in and she was like, all right, let's start a Castor smoothie midwife brew induction, and maybe we can get it dilated enough to then do the Foley bulb, because you have to have enough dilation to get the Foley bulb up inside your cervix. So I'm like, sounds great. We do some monitoring. He's all good. Heart rate's good. So we go home with the Castor Oil Smoothie. True to form, if y'all have been following along, you know that like I got so sick throughout my pregnancy. I didn't get diagnosed with hyperemesis, if that's how you say it, gravidum, but I was so sick. And true to form, I could not keep down the Castor smoothie. So my husband went and got a Zofran pill from the birth center, and I took that before drinking the second dose of the smoothie, and that one I was able to keep down. It did stimulate contractions. And so I was like super excited. I was like, this is it. It's happening. And about 4 hours later, my midwife called and was like, come back into the birth center. Let's monitor. Let's do a cervical check. Make sure he's handling the induction okay, because that's really important. And I was so excited. And then I got there and I was still only 1 centimeter. So that kind of sucked. That was a bummer. And she told me to just go home, chill out. We didn't need to rush it. It's not like the induction was an emergency. So that's what I did. Around 8 in the morning, we went back, sorry, I'm skipping over a part. Around like 4 o'clock that morning, I definitely started having contractions. And I think it was related to the fact that she was doing cervical checks, because I got my bloody show and I was having contractions. And so it's like, things are really happening now. Yay. So it's about 4:30 in the morning. I went back to the birth center to get checked again. Not much had changed except my cervix had become a little stretchier and softer, but I was having contractions. She did that cervical check to see if we could do the Foley bulb or a membrane sweep, but I wasn't dilated enough. But then afterward, when I got home for about 2 hours straight, I have been nonstop cramping and I have the bloody show. So that's exciting. I was able to get about 2 hours of sleep from 2:30 to 4:30, and now I'm back up. And I'm having trouble figuring out what's a contraction, because I'm in constant cramping in my pelvis and in my lower back, but definitely things are happening. And when I went back at 8 a.m. that morning to get checked again, hopefully do a Foley bulb, I was still only 1 centimeter. And that's the hard part about cervical checks, is like they can be frustrating if you're not progressing the way that you wanted to. So at that point, they recommended just relaxing. Things clearly are not progressing, but it's not an emergency. So they sent me back home and they gave me this shot that they give at the birth center to women who are clearly going to have long early labors to help them sleep and relax. And it knocked me out. It was amazing. So I went home, I slept for a while, and I woke up and was just chilling in bed, like browsing Instagram, when all of a sudden I felt like this gush of fluid. And y'all, the discharge during pregnancy is unreal, especially in the 3rd trimester. So I was kind of like, is this discharge? Is this pee? Like, what's going on? But as soon as I stood up, I hopped out of bed, it gushed, and it gushed while I ran across my room into the bathroom. It was not cool. And I was like, this is my water breaking, but I was really excited until I look at the color of the water and it's like a yellowy green color. And I remembered in the back of my head that that could be a sign of meconium, which is baby poop. So babies can sometimes poop in their own bag of waters, and the poop's called meconium, and it's dangerous. So I called the midwives right away, and I'm like, hey, my water broke, super exciting, but also like, it's like a yellowy green color and I'm a little nervous. So they had me send photos and then called me in immediately and confirmed it was meconium. So that was the first like big twist, because with the presence of meconium, they wanted to transfer me to a hospital right away. The thing to know about midwives and birth centers is that midwives are not risk takers. I feel like people think it's riskier because they're not doctors. And I guess to a degree, maybe it is, although statistically midwife births are safer and have better outcomes for mom. But the thing is like, my birth center, at least my midwives, they're not risk takers. The second they felt like things had escalated where I was no longer a good candidate to birth at the birth center, they said, let's get you over to the hospital. So I transferred to our local hospital. It's nothing fancy, but that didn't matter to me. And I was under my midwife's care from the birth center the whole time. That's why we use that hospital, because they have hospital privileges. So I was able to never see a doctor. I only saw my nurse team and my midwives, and that gave me a lot of comfort because I was loving my midwife model of care. So transfer to the hospital, confirm meconium, and at that point they were like, hey, we now cannot in good faith let you labor naturally because there's a risk to the baby with meconium. We need to get him out. It's not like an emergency, but we can't just like take our time, because I still was only 1 freaking centimeter. So at this point they recommended that we start Pitocin, and y'all, that made me nervous, but I rolled with it. Like, I really wanted to avoid that, but at the end of the day, what matters, like I said, is safety first and foremost. And knowing that we needed to get him out here sooner than later, I said, okay, let's do it. Now, an important thing to note here, I, in my early labor, had felt like I was having back contractions, back labor, but I wasn't sure. Guys, and this is the only part that, like, I don't want to scare anyone, but like, I had 100% back labor. I never felt anything in my stomach. I never felt anything in my hips, in my uterus, in my vagina, like cervix. I only felt it in my back, and it was the most excruciating pain I'd ever been in. And Pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, that ramps it up. Like, that's the whole point. You're inducing labor. And it's rough on the body, but I was like so determined to be, no epidural, even though I was having Pitocin. But when I say I've never been in so much pain in my life, I was like throwing myself moaning onto the bed, and my doula, bless her heart, was trying like everything in the books to reduce pain, and it made it worse because back labor is just such a fucking bear. It was a bear. And I labored like that for like 8 hours, like a really, really long time. Okay, I'm throwing this in as well because I kind of forgot about this until now. The Pitocin thing. So they started me on Pitocin, a tiny amount. Our goal was to just kickstart labor and then pull back, or kickstart and ramp up very slowly. Unfortunately, even at a tiny, tiny dose of Pitocin right out the gate, his heart rate was decelerating with my contractions dramatically. So I was in a high risk category in terms of the Pitocin induction. So rather than rush me to a C-section because it wasn't an emergency, we decided to labor for like hours at a super low dose of Pitocin to get him used to that kind of contraction, and then try ramping it up. So I was laboring under Pitocin with back labor for so much longer than I needed to. And when I say needed to, I mean like what most people would do, simply because of his heart rate and because I didn't want a C-section if I could avoid it. So that was the alternative. That was the trade-off. Like, go for a C-section or wait it out longer. Now, looking back, I just probably would have gotten the epidural earlier had I known. And then I started getting these horrible shakes, like, and everyone was worried I was like going into shock, and I was getting scared. And that was when I said, I can't do this. I need an epidural. So I called my midwife in and I said, is it too early? Because I was still only 2 freaking centimeters. And she was like, no. I've done epidurals at this point, and I would actually recommend it because I think your body is so overwhelmed from the back labor pain that you're not calm enough to be progressing naturally. So that's one of the biggest things I learned in hypnobirthing, which is one of the prep courses I took for going drug-free, which was my birth preference. It was that your body has to be calm and relaxed in order for the uterus muscles, those are actual muscles contracting, in order for them to work properly, they have to be calm and relaxed. Well, obviously with excruciating back labor, baby girl, I was not calm or relaxed. So I wasn't progressing. And that like really helped me not feel guilty at all about getting the epidural. And I just like rolled with it. Now, the darkest hour of this labor was waiting for the epidural. There had been a nurse shift change, and I had loved my nurses. They were so lovely and helpful, and like, your nurses are your team. They're the ones in there with you, cheering you on, taking care of you, monitoring you. And we had a shift change, and the nurse who came in was rude, difficult, really hard to understand, which I don't want to paint like the wrong picture, but just like she would mumble and she had a heavy accent. And when I would ask for clarification on what she was asking me, because I couldn't understand her through my pain, she would like roll her eyes and get frustrated. And I think that she was actually really nice. We just did not vibe. And it was really frustrating because I'm waiting for this epidural for 2 hours in excruciating pain. My doula is sitting over there like, this is nuts. My nurse is really not helping me at all. And even small things like there weren't a lot of like places to sit in the hospital room, and we asked if we could get an extra chair, and my room was supposed to have like a bedside table, and we asked if we could get the bedside table because it was missing, and she kept being like, oh yeah, I'm on it, and like hours later we never got those things. So it was partially a bad attitude and not gelling with the nurse, and partially like she was just not fully present, and that was a very frustrating couple of hours in my labor, I'm not gonna lie. That's when the shakes got the worst. That's when I was scared. But like I said, this is a positive labor story, so don't let that freak you out, because at the end of the day, I don't even really remember it that well. I just know that that's what happened, and I was so unprepared for the amount of time it would take to get the epidural. So if you think you're gonna want it, just request it. And I was so freaked out by the shakes, and apparently the shakes are super, super normal. So finally the epidural comes, and like, they're freaking putting a hole in your spine, and it's a big deal, but I was in so much pain that I literally could not have cared less. Like, everyone else is kind of like somber and apprehensive in the room while he's inserting it, and I was literally just stab me in the back. Please God, stab me in the freaking back now. And as soon as he got it in, I felt so much better. I was able to nap. I'd been awake for like 24 hours at this point, laboring. I hadn't eaten in like 14 hours. I was weak. I was shaking. I finally was able to get a few hours of sleep in from like 4 to 6 a.m. Oh. Okay, hold on. This is me piping in while I'm editing. Something I forgot. My epidural only took around my belly. I had full use of my legs, and I could feel everything in my lady bits. And that was ideal for me because it took away my back labor, but I could still feel everything, which is what I wanted while, like, that was my goal with using the birth center and going drug-free. So that's an important detail here. Like, I could feel everything and had full movement below basically my belly button. So yeah, and that was so game-changing, you guys. Like, it was game-changing. Now here is the really exciting part. So I napped from like 4 to 6 a.m. and guess what? I had progressed to 6 centimeters, and that is not a coincidence. My body needed that epidural to relax because the back labor was so overwhelming to my body. So that was awesome. I was so excited. And then I kind of like napped a little bit more. I still had the shakes. That's also common from the epidural. Just so you guys know, like, if you get it, don't be freaked out. It is very common. And so around like 9:30 in the morning, I'm up and I'm getting this really, really strong rectal pressure, like right in my butthole. And I remembered people saying like feeling pushy feels like you need to take a big poop, but I just, as a first-time mom, I really didn't know what that meant. And I just kept feeling this pressure, but I don't know. I was like, there's no way that that's it. Because it literally felt like I had to poop. Not in like a diarrhea, stomach crampy way, but like a pressure on my butthole way. Like TMI, like, you know, when you have a really firm poop that is ready to come out and you just feel so much pressure in your butthole, that's what it felt like. And it was coming in waves. So I call a midwife in and she looks at my printout of my contractions on the monitor and she's like, listen, I'm going to check you, but don't get your hopes up because your contraction pattern is not indicative of what I would say is like ready to start pushing, that kind of thing. But she checked me anyway and it was 9.5 centimeters. So takeaway there, always ask. You have the right as the patient to ask, to say no, to be inquisitive, to do whatever. And that's what I did. I said, hey, I feel pushy. And guess what? I was ready to push. So at that point, they changed my position because I'd been laying down. And they changed me into this upright position because I had like a really small cervical lip left that we needed to get his head past. So we wanted to let gravity basically do its thing and kind of pull his head down through and past that lip. So I stayed there for maybe an hour and the pressure was crazy and I was like, I'm feeling pushy. So they came back in, I was fully dilated, and at that point, we started doing this pushing called Tug of War. I'm going to insert a picture of another woman laboring to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like. But basically there's this bar and I anchored my feet up on the bar and they wrapped like sheets around it. And you pull yourself up by your arms and brace with your legs while you're pushing. And we did that for about 20 minutes to move him down the birth canal. Guys, I thought this was really fun. It felt like a fun workout to me and it felt productive. And I was like, ooh, we're at the end. Like, I'm going to meet my baby soon. Like, I was in a great mood. I felt like I can do this. I loved it. And then finally he was like there and she was like, all right, we're switching into like real pushing mode. And I pushed like that for about 40 minutes. It was exhausting. Like, that's what I'll say. And I have questions after this that people have asked that I'm going to answer about, like, to go into more detail about pushing, tearing, contractions, all that good stuff. But it was exhausting. I'll say that. It was exciting. There were moments where it hurt, but it was more so just tiring. And eventually they moved a mirror in front of me so I could see, because once he was crowning, that's when I was like hitting my most tired and they wanted to keep me motivated. And it worked. Like, seeing your baby crown, it's crazy. So I pushed, I hit the ring of fire. He got stuck in the ring of fire and that was like my own doing. I was so dizzy and weak at that moment from pushing so hard to get him through the ring of fire that I stopped pushing right when he was there and he stayed there. He didn't go back up and he didn't go out. And I was like, I have to keep pushing. Give me one more push. Like I was like, one more push. The push where I was like, I can't. He flew out, y'all. He flew out. That's what my husband and I talk about and remember the most. My husband was down on the business end watching things, which I was surprised about, but that's what we talked about the most, is the surprise of how quickly he rocketed out once it was time. Like, the second his head was out, exploded out of me. It was wild and the relief was immense. It was incredible. And so after that, I got some skin to skin. Now, he had meconium, he had pooped, so there were other people in the room. There was a respiratory team, a NICU team. They had to towel him off, which, like, one of my birth preferences was to leave his vernix on, but we had to towel him off because he had poop on him. We did skin to skin. I was able to do delayed cord clamping. The NICU team swooped in and kind of did what they needed to do with him on my chest. He did end up, after we cut the cord, having to get pulled away from me for a few minutes because he was having like a respiratory fluid issue, but it was all good. They weighed him, they did his stuff. His dad was with him when they had him away from me, and during that time is when I got stitched up. So I had a 2nd degree tear, but like a minor 2nd degree tear. And yeah, that was my labor and delivery experience. So I got stitched up I birthed the placenta, They do this thing called fundal massage where they have to make sure your uterus is shrinking back down, because it actually shrinks down a lot immediately after birth. The fundal massage is hands down the worst part of it all, and putting in the IV port. Like, they collapsed my vein. Those were worse, I think, than like, not worse than the back labor. Sorry, my camera just died. So yeah, putting in the port and the fundal massage, I think, were some of the worst, like, quick moments of labor. Like, obviously back labor actually hurt more than those things, but the port where they like collapsed my vein, right? And then the fundal massage, ooh, brutal. So then you birth the placenta, which to me felt like a huge relief. I did not feel pain at all. So I think she was like in there and like pulled it out. And I was like, ooh, that's nice. Cause you do have contractions to like birth the placenta. And I was able to see mine. I'll put a picture here. It was actually really cool. And then eventually I had to go to the bathroom. I had to have my first pee. They did not tell me how bad it was going to sting. And I was terrified, so terrified that I really needed to pee. And I just like clamped it all in and was like, I'll deal with that later. Right after you give birth, it is heavy freaking bleeding, because one side of the placenta is what was attached to your uterus. And so when it births, you have this huge wound inside your uterus and all of that blood has to come out. So the first time that I went pee, it was like 1% pee and 90% bright red pure blood. And I was like, oh, is this normal? And she was like, yes, this is what you want. And then very quickly I was moved into like the postpartum mom and baby care, which is just kind of like they're taking care of you, they're monitoring baby, you're going through like the normal discharge steps and tests. They're teaching you some basic things about taking care of baby, making sure that your vitals are okay. And that was actually a really nice stay at the hospital. Like, my husband and I enjoyed that. And it's kind of nice to have your first night in the hospital, honestly, because it was just reassuring in a way, which I was excited for the birth center to be able to go home so quickly. The birth center allows you to discharge much quicker, but it was actually nice to have an overnight at the hospital and have those first like 24 to 30 hours be monitored by professionals. Like, it kind of took away some anxiety. But yeah, there was a lot of blood. It was very stingy. I have a lot of tips and tricks and advice about postpartum that I'm gonna make a separate video about, in terms of like products, tips and tricks on like how to be the most comfortable. But that was like my labor and delivery story. So it was 34 hours from the time I first started going into labor with the induction, my original Castor induction. It was like 20 hours from the time my water broke and I started Pitocin, so my real induction. It was a lot. Like, my midwives, you know, they're on 24-hour shifts, and I went through 3 midwives, the end of one shift, a full second shift, and the start of the other shift. And the woman who discharged me, the midwife who discharged us from the hospital, was actually the one who I started my labor with. And she was like, I was checking on you every day. Like, poor girl, she still doesn't have her baby. But I really had such a positive experience overall. It was very magical and I loved it, even though there were moments that were overwhelmingly difficult. I know people say that. I know that it sounds cliche. And listen, if you're someone who hated birth and labor altogether, that's totally fine. Like, the gamut of experiences is real. But I walked out of there just high on life and very few regrets. Like, literally the only thing I would change, the only thing would be that shitty nurse. That was it. Like, everything else was just the way it happened. The nurse was the only thing that I felt like I really got a shit hand here that has nothing to do with my body. It's just like her being a bitch, honestly. So yeah, I have questions from you guys that I'm going to go through one by one and answer in more detail. So the first one is, what are contractions actually like? I feel like I can kind of describe early labor contractions. For me, it was a little bit in my uterus, almost feeling like the start of period cramps. But I'm not the right person to ask for this because I had back labor. So I had maybe an hour of those kinds when I was stimulating my boobs and pumping while doing the castor smoothie. And then it immediately went into back labor. And so I'm not the person to ask. I've heard everything from diarrhea cramps to period cramps to severe sharp pain. And it can be in your hips, your stomach, your legs, or your back. I pray for all of you that you don't have back labor, but just know if you do, you can get through it. You can get an epidural. Modern medicine is amazing. So yeah, contractions for me were terrible as back labor. Lots of questions around what pushing and the ring of fire was actually like, as well as did you poop? For me, pushing was a huge relief, not just physically, because you work with each contraction, so you're not even feeling the contraction. You're like working with it to push. So it was relief that way. So yeah, with pushing and the ring of fire, I could feel everything because like I said, my labor, my epidural only took to my belly and my back. Everything basically belly button and down was fully functional, which was ideal for me. And I felt like pushing was such a relief because you work with each contraction to push the baby. So you don't pay attention to the contraction and it just feels productive. So like mentally, you're like, yes, let's get the freaking show on the road. I loved pushing. I really did. That being said, by the end of it, I was so exhausted and worried I couldn't keep going. But that really is the moment when your baby's about to be there. Like 9 out of 10 times the women I talk to say that like when they realized how hard pushing is and they didn't know if they could keep doing it and they got worried that they couldn't do it is like right before the baby came. And that was my experience. The ring of fire, I definitely felt it. Like it was intense, but I didn't think it was unmanageable. The only thing that really sucked for me is, like I said, he kind of got caught in the ring of fire and I literally was squirming like, oh my God, let me push again because I can't, holy shit. It was intense. It burned, but it wasn't like mind-blowingly painful. I don't know how to explain it. It was just intense. And the thing is like when you're there and it's intense, you're about to birth your baby. Like you need to breathe through 1 or 2 more pushes and you're there. So my mind was not really paying attention to how much it hurt because I knew this is it. Pooping, I did not poop, but I totally understand why you would have. It is literally the same feeling as though you're pooping. Any time that she'd be like, great push. I was like, I'm literally trying to take a shit on this table right now. But no, I didn't poop. I would not have cared if I had. I don't know if I would have noticed if I had, but I asked afterward because I was just so curious. Tearing and like stitching, immediate postpartum, that kind of thing. So I had a 2nd degree tear, nothing crazy. It was mostly internal and it was because he came out so fast that his shoulder kind of caught me funny. I felt like the 5 minutes postpartum actually hurt more than pushing. Everything was very stingy and swollen on me. And maybe it was because they had taken him from me at this point and were working on him. So I was aware of what was happening, whereas a lot of women are still in like their little twilight zone with their baby and they don't know what's going on downstairs. But I didn't have a baby on my chest at that point, so I was just watching her stitch me up and I was like hyper aware of how stingy and swollen and irritated my lady bits felt. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Like the tearing part, I wasn't aware that I tore until afterward. Make sure you ask what kind of tear you have. Some doctors don't like volunteer that info to you, but it's important to know for recovery purposes. But yeah, the tearing itself wasn't that bad. I just was hyper aware of being stitched up and I didn't love that part. And I was hyper aware of just kind of feeling very stingy and swollen. So yeah, that wasn't great, but honestly, I still at 5 days feel pretty damn good. Like I'm a little sore. I feel like someone kind of kicked me in the hoo-ha, but overall I feel shockingly okay for having just rocketed a baby out of my lady bits. Would I use the birth center again? Hands down, yes, absolutely. I loved my midwife team who cared for me throughout my pregnancy. And I have a lot of like peace of mind, actually more so now afterward, having gone through all this, knowing that when push comes to shove and there's risk, the midwives do the right thing and they put you in the right places, like transferring to the hospital. And that I think is a big comfort to me. Like, I feel like I got the best of both worlds. I got that midwife model of care. I had my midwife deliver my baby. We did everything that we could. I fully believe had I been in a regular hospital setting, I would have ended up in a C-section. But my midwives were willing to do things as long as baby was safe that would help me have a natural birth. And by natural, I don't mean to say that in a rude way. I just mean a vaginal birth. So take that with a grain of salt. C-sections are perfectly natural. So yeah, I would use it again, hands down. Questions about hypnobirthing and like, did that help me? Would I do it again for pain management? I think had I not had back labor, it would have been super helpful for pain management. Regardless, the course we took, which I'll link down below, helped us in so many other ways for prepping for baby and birth. Both me and my husband took the course. And I think it also gave me a lot of confidence in making the decision to actually be induced and get the epidural. Like, the course is not just about how to go drug-free. It's about how to have a calm, safe, positive birth. And knowing that sometimes that means there are interventions that happen and things that go off course. And I felt so calm about all the decisions that I made in the heat of the moment. So yes, I think hypnobirthing and the course I took was so worth it. And I hope for future births that I can use it and not have back labor. Okay, next question is, do I have any regrets? Were there any surprises? Are there things I would do differently? I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and in terms of things I can control, like I wish I could have just controlled that nurse. And honestly, looking back, I should have asked for a new nurse. I just didn't even think about that being an option. I'm too nice of a person as well. I probably just wouldn't have done it. But that sucked. But in terms of like things that I could have done differently, there's only one. I wish I had done more strenuous exercise. Pushing was so hard. I walked a lot. I stayed fairly active during my pregnancy, but I certainly was not like exercising and like working out. Pushing was so exhausting. I felt so physically underprepared for how hard and demanding it would be that I wish I had worked out harder. The other thing that like I'm taking away with me, and I wouldn't call it a regret, but I wish I'd asked for the epidural sooner. As soon as I realized how severe the back labor was, I should have asked for the epidural. But I really, really wanted to do it drug-free, and I should have just like owned it. Like I said, once I made the decision, I was like, let's do it. But I wish I had just noticed how stressed out my body was and rolled with the epidural sooner, because it could have saved me probably like 5 hours off of my labor. Was the doula worth it? Yes. Yes. My husband was like, he tried, but he was so unhelpful with back labor. And at that point, we were so far away from having a baby that I told him to just nap and sleep. So it was just kind of like me and the doula, and she tried every little thing that she could: oils, counter pressure, a TENS machine, affirmations, all sorts of stuff. For the back labor, and they just weren't working, but it was so reassuring to have her there. She was so helpful when I was making decisions, about the epidural, just cheering me on when I was making decisions about, all of it. She was just my cheerleader. And when I was having trouble with the nurse and getting the epidural, the anesthesiologist up there, she was helping to advocate for me. So yeah, I had a very positive experience with her. She was cheering me on while I was pushing. Yeah, it was great. I wouldn't change that whatsoever, especially as a first-time mom, with a first-time dad cheering me on. Like, we did not know what we were doing and what it was going to be like. So it was nice to have someone who, like, this is what they do in our corner. Those were the main questions that you guys asked me. Like I said, I'm going to make whole separate videos on hospital bag, what I used, what I didn't use, / like what I wish I had brought, as well as a postpartum essentials video, because those deserve videos all of their own. So yeah, that was my labor and delivery story, and it was intense. There were so many twists and turns. It was not what I had envisioned, but it was beautiful and perfect in its own way. And I have so few things that I would do differently. I feel very, very lucky with what I had. And of course, in the end, you wind up with your baby, and it really is just the most incredibly surreal moment. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Feel free to ask any questions below. I don't care if it's TMI, I will answer it. If you want to get more info like this, follow me on Instagram, because that's where I post the real shit. Yeah, I'll talk to you guys next time. Leave me your questions below. Bye.